Welcome to our channel, where we share inspiring stories that touch the heart. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and join our amazing community. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers all around the world. Sit back, relax, and get ready for a story that will leave you inspired. The cafe was alive with its usual morning symphony. The clinking of spoons against ceramic mugs, the soft hum of conversation, and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet aroma of pastries, wrapping the room in warmth. At a corner table by the window, Barron Trump quietly sipped his cappuccino, his tall frame slightly hunched as he gazed out at the bustling small-town street. Dressed in a plain hoodie and jeans, he blended in effortlessly, appearing like any other visitor seeking a peaceful moment. Across the room, Jack leaned back in his chair, loudly discussing last night's game with his small group of friends. Jack, a man known for his quick wit and even quicker temper, thrived on being the center of attention. He noticed Barron almost immediately, not because of recognition, but because of his reserved demeanor and striking height. "What's with the quiet giant over there?" Jack remarked loudly, his voice cutting through the cafe's cozy hum. His friends chuckled, more out of habit than genuine amusement. Barron didn't react, focused on the view outside as if the comment hadn't reached him. But Jack wasn't done. "Looks like he's lost or something," he continued, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Bet he's one of those trust fund kids who can't even order a coffee without someone holding their hand." The laughter grew louder, drawing glances from nearby tables. A young barista behind the counter frowned but hesitated to intervene. Barron remained calm, taking another sip of his coffee. His composed indifference only seemed to spur Jack on. "Hey, buddy," Jack called out, his voice booming. "You planning to say something, or is staring out the window all you've got today?" His friends erupted in laughter again, though a few looked uncomfortable as the tension in the room thickened. A middle-aged woman at the next table gave Jack a disapproving glare, but he ignored her. His ego was in full swing, fueled by the spotlight he'd created. The barista stepped out from behind the counter, her hands nervously clutching her apron. "Sir, could you please keep it down?" she asked gently. "You're disturbing other customers." Jack waved her off dismissively, his gaze still fixed on Barron. By now, the cafe had fallen quiet, all eyes on the unfolding scene. Jack smirked, taking a step closer to Barron's table. "Come on, pal," he said, his voice loud enough to fill the room. "What's the matter? Too good to talk to the rest of us?" Barron finally looked up, his calm gaze meeting Jack's with quiet intensity. For a brief moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Without a trace of anger or defensiveness, Barron set down his cup and leaned back slightly in his chair, ready to respond. The stillness in his expression spoke volumes, a stark contrast to Jack's loud bravado. Everyone in the cafe waited, the air heavy with anticipation, as the moment hung in the balance. The cafe was silent, save for the faint clink of a spoon against a cup somewhere in the background. All eyes were on Barron as he slowly leaned back in his chair, his calm gaze never wavering under Jack's piercing stare. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Jack, emboldened by the audience he had drawn, took another step closer. "Well, cat got your tongue?" he sneered, his voice filled with mockery. "You think you're too important to talk to the rest of us? Or maybe you're just clueless about how the real world works." Barron didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as though carefully considering Jack's words. Then, with a quiet yet firm tone, he replied, "I'm here for the same reason as everyone else. To enjoy a cup of coffee. Nothing more." His voice was steady, carrying neither anger nor defensiveness, but rather an understated strength that instantly set him apart from Jack's bluster. Jack scoffed, his smirk faltering slightly as he crossed his arms. "Right," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "And I suppose you expect everyone to just ignore the fact that you're sitting here, looking like some trust fund kid who's never had a hard day in his life." He gestured broadly, as if rallying the other patrons to his side. "Guys like you don't know what it's like out here. Rising costs, hard work, struggling just to get by. You're disconnected from the real world." Barron remained composed, his eyes never leaving Jack's. He allowed a pause to hang in the air before responding, his voice calm but deliberate. "You're right about one thing," he said. I don't know what it's like to struggle in the same way you do, but that doesn't mean I don't care, or that I don't try to understand." His words, spoken without a trace of defensiveness, carried a weight that silenced even Jack's friends, who had been shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Before Jack could respond, an older man seated nearby cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Actually," he said, his voice firm, "you might want to think twice before you judge someone you don't know." All eyes shifted to the man, who set down his coffee cup and continued, addressing the room. "This young man has been supporting local charities and families in need ever since he arrived in town. My daughter works at the food bank, and she told me about the donation that helped us restock our shelves last week. It came from him." He gestured toward Barron. Jack's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion and embarrassment. The cafe was utterly still as murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. The truth of Barron's quiet generosity contrasted sharply with the assumptions Jack had made. For the first time, Jack looked genuinely unsure of himself, his bravado crumbling under the weight of his mistake. Barron, however, remained calm, his expression unchanged, as though he had nothing to prove. The confrontation was no longer about him. It was about the lesson Jack was beginning to learn. The older man's revelation about Barron's quiet acts of generosity rippled through the cafe like a sudden wave, washing over the judgmental atmosphere Jack had stirred. Whispers began to circulate among the patrons, some nodding as they pieced together the truth of who Barron was and what he had done for the community. Jack, standing awkwardly at the center of it all, felt the weight of the room shift. His confidence drained, replaced by a flush of embarrassment. Barron remained seated, calm and collected, but now all eyes were on him in a different light. Slowly, he set his coffee cup down and stood, his tall frame commanding attention without effort. Meeting Jack's gaze directly, he spoke in a tone that was neither confrontational nor defensive. "I'm Barron," he said simply, his voice steady and unassuming. A few gasps and murmurs followed as recognition dawned on more faces in the cafe. Jack blinked, his bravado faltering further as he struggled to reconcile the young man before him with the assumptions he had so eagerly voiced. I didn't realize," Jack stammered, his arms crossing defensively, though his tone had lost its edge. Barron's expression remained neutral, almost gentle as he continued. "I came here because I heard this cafe was a wonderful part of the community," he explained, his words slow and deliberate. "I wanted to experience that for myself and enjoy the hospitality that makes small towns like this so special, not to stand out or cause anyone discomfort." The room fell completely silent, except for the soft hiss of the espresso machine in the background. Jack shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the older man who had defended Barron earlier. Before Jack could speak again, another patron, a woman seated by the counter, stood and joined the conversation. "He's telling the truth," she said, her voice carrying a note of pride. "I run the local food pantry, and his donation last week helped us serve over 100 families. He didn't want any recognition for it either. He just asked how he could help." Jack's face reddened further, and he looked down at the floor, clearly struggling to find the words. The cafe murmured in quiet admiration for Barron's humility, the earlier tension replaced with a newfound respect for the young man who had handled the confrontation with such grace. Barron turned back to Jack, his tone firm but kind. "It's easy to make assumptions about people," he said, "but I believe we all have more in common than we think. I'm just here to appreciate what this town has to offer, like anyone else." His words carried no malice, only an invitation for understanding. Jack looked up, his eyes meeting Barron's once more. I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice quiet and sincere. "I shouldn't have judged you without knowing anything about you." Barron offered a small nod, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Apology accepted," he replied. "It's never too late to choose kindness." The tension dissolved completely, leaving the room lighter, as if a lesson had been collectively learned. Jack's apology hung in the air, his words quiet but sincere. The room, once filled with tension and judgment, had softened. Barron gave a small nod, his expression calm and empathetic. "We all make mistakes," he said simply, his voice carrying no trace of resentment. "What matters is what we do after we realize them." Jack shifted his weight uncomfortably, glancing around at the faces in the cafe. He could see the mixture of understanding and quiet encouragement in their expressions. The vulnerability of his moment was humbling, and for the first time he felt not judgment from others, but the weight of his own actions. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do better." Barron offered a reassuring smile. "That's all anyone can ask," he replied. But instead of letting the moment rest, he gently redirected the conversation. "The truth is, we're all part of this community, and it's only as strong as the compassion we show each other. Whether it's a kind word, a helping hand, or simply taking the time to listen, small acts can make a big difference." The cafe's patrons listened intently, and even Jack found himself nodding. It was hard to argue with the quiet conviction in Barron's tone. The young barista who had stood uncertainly by the counter stepped forward, breaking the silence. "Thank you for how you handled all of this," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "I didn't know what to do when things started getting tense, but you stayed calm and kind. It made a difference." Barron turned to her with the same warmth he had shown Jack. "Thank you for stepping in," he said. "It's not easy to stand up and ask for kindness when things are heated, but it's important. You helped set the tone, and that takes courage." The barista's cheeks flushed, but she smiled, her gratitude evident. "And thank you for everything you've done for this town," she added. "A lot of people are better off because of your generosity, even if they don't know it was you." Barron shook his head slightly, his modesty clear. "It's not about recognition," he said. "It's about doing what feels right. If we all focused on helping where we can, imagine what a difference we could make." The cafe buzzed with quiet agreement. People exchanged glances, as though each one were silently considering how they could contribute more to their community. Even Jack seemed reflective, his earlier bravado replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful demeanor. As the moment passed, Barron offered one final thought. "It's never too late to make a positive change, for ourselves, for others, and for the places we call home." The message lingered long after he sat back down, his coffee now cold but untouched. Jack, still processing the interaction, approached the counter and quietly asked to cover Barron's bill. It was a small gesture, but one that carried the weight of newfound humility and respect. The cafe slowly returned to its familiar rhythm, with conversations resuming and the comforting clatter of cups and plates filling the space. Yet, the energy in the room had shifted. What had started as an uncomfortable confrontation had transformed into a moment of reflection, not just for Jack, but for everyone who had witnessed it. Jack stood by the counter, watching Barron return to his seat, still grappling with the weight of his actions. For someone accustomed to quick wit and loud opinions, the humbling experience left him unusually quiet. Jack turned to the barista. "I'd like to cover his coffee," he said, his voice subdued. The barista nodded, ringing up the order without a word, but her slight smile showed her approval. Jack took his receipt and slid it into his pocket, feeling a small sense of relief. It wasn't enough to erase the moment, but it was a start. At his table, Barron remained calm, seemingly unaffected by the earlier tension. He glanced at his untouched coffee, then at the sunlight streaming through the window. His poise, even in the face of insult, had left an impression that words couldn't fully capture. Jack, now seated back with his friends, found himself glancing over at Barron, reflecting on the grace he had shown. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt the sting of regret coupled with a newfound respect. Later that evening, Jack sat alone in his small apartment, scrolling through local news on his phone. An article about the town's food bank caught his eye, the headline referencing a major donation that had come at a crucial time. Reading further, he realized it was Barron's quiet contribution that had kept the shelves stocked for struggling families. The guilt he had felt earlier deepened, but it was accompanied by something else, a sense of inspiration. If someone like Barron, who had no obligation to this town, could act with such generosity, what was stopping Jack from doing the same? The next morning, Jack visited the local charity Barron had supported. He introduced himself awkwardly to the staff, explaining that he wanted to volunteer. Over the following weeks, Jack found himself spending evenings sorting donations, organizing food drives, and even helping distribute supplies to families in need. It was unfamiliar territory for him, but each act of service brought a quiet satisfaction. He realized that his assumptions about others had often blinded him to his own potential for kindness. Meanwhile, Barron's visit to the cafe remained a quiet story shared among the patrons. His actions had left a lasting impact, not just on Jack, but on everyone present that day. The barista often recounted the moment to new customers, emphasizing the importance of humility and grace in the face of adversity. As Barron left the cafe that day, the sun had broken through the morning clouds, casting a golden glow on the quiet street. His steady stride and unassuming demeanor spoke volumes about the kind of strength that mattered most, the strength to lead with kindness and inspire change through actions, not words. This story reminds us of the power of kindness, humility, and the impact of leading by example. Barron's grace turned a moment of conflict into one of reflection and growth, inspiring not just Jack, but an entire community. What do you think is the most important lesson from this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this inspired you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more uplifting stories. Hit the bell icon to stay updated, and let's continue spreading positivity together.